All right, diving right in today. We're going deep, really deep into what it means to live a full life, a wholehearted life.
Yeah, we're talking the gifts of imperfection.
Exactly. And this book, it isn't just some quick thought experiment. We're talking years of work here.
Oh, absolutely. Notebooks, journals, new research, years of dedication to figure out how to live with courage, compassion, and connection. The real deal.
And what I think is so cool about this book is how the author weaves in her own journey. It's like she realized she wasn't living as wholeheartedly as she could be, and the book, it came out of that struggle, that honesty.
It's like she's right there with you,
Yeah.
questioning things, figuring it out. It makes it so relatable. It's not just some expert talking down to you.
Totally. And it wasn't always easy for her either. There were tears, tough moments, but then those amazing breakthroughs. It's inspiring. So today we're going to unpack those breakthroughs, those 10 guideposts for living wholeheartedly.
And we're going to define some of those big, important words like, what do we really mean by love? Belonging. Authenticity.
Words we use all the time, but maybe haven't really thought about deeply. We want you to walk away from this deep dive with a new understanding, something you can actually use in your life. Okay, so first things first. Let's talk about how important it is to define the words we use.
Yeah, it's like we throw around words like love and belonging, but what do they actually mean? And this is where the author gets really interesting. She goes beyond just dictionary definitions.
She looked at real people, their experiences, and used that to build these powerful definitions. Sometimes she even came up with totally new ways of thinking about these words.
Like with play. She brings in Dr. Stuart Brown's work, and it turns out play isn't just for kids. It's crucial for everyone. It impacts your brain, your empathy, your social skills, even your creativity.
It makes you realize we might be missing out on some serious joy by dismissing play as, just something kids do. And I love how the author isn't afraid to, stir things up a bit with these definitions. She wants us to really wrestle with these important words.
It's not enough to just assume everyone understands them the same way. That shared understanding, it's like the foundation for self-awareness and real connection, which are so important for wholehearted living.
So true. All right, let's switch gears for a second and talk about this idea of digging deep. We've all been there, right? Totally exhausted, but we just have to push through.
Yeah, the dig deep mentality. You're overwhelmed, but you got to keep going for work, for family, for everything. And it's almost like a badge of honor, like, look how much I can handle.
But the author found that this constant pushing, it can actually work against wholehearted living. It's not sustainable.
Exactly. So she came up with a new way to dig deep. It's about being deliberate, inspired, and going. It's a total shift in perspective.
So instead of mindlessly pushing through when you're drained, you make a conscious choice. You ask, what do I really need right now? What will inspire me? What will actually help me move forward?
Like that example she gives about getting lost in that internet rabbit hole. Instead of just continuing and feeling worse, she chose to watch a movie. It wasn't about being lazy. It was about recognizing what she needed to recharge.
It's about being intentional with your energy, right? Okay, so let's move on to what the author calls the gifts of imperfection. Courage, compassion, and connection. These are like the cornerstones of wholehearted living.
And she makes the point that the bravest thing you can do is own your story, imperfections and all, and love yourself through it. That's where these gifts come from embracing who you are, even the messy parts.
It's like that story she tells about the parenting talk where she felt so much pressure to impress this person who was being disruptive. She ended up trying to be someone she wasn't.
And it totally backfired.
Yeah.
By trying to be perfect, she actually created more distance between herself and the other parents. It's like that need to hustle for worthiness, it never works.
And afterward, that feeling of shame, that shame storm was so intense. But what she did next was so powerful. She reached out to her sister.
And that's where the compassion comes in. Her sister listened, shared her own experiences, and suddenly she felt seen, accepted, even loved in that moment of vulnerability. That's the power of connection.
It's about being real with someone and them being real with you. And that experience, it really solidified the definition of courage, compassion, and connection as gifts that come from being imperfect. Now, the author also talks about ordinary courage, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, it's about those everyday acts of bravery, like being excited about an opportunity even if you're afraid it might not work out, or like those parents at preschool who shared their not-so-perfect parenting moments. It's about showing up authentically, even when it's scary.
And compassion, it's not about pity, right? It's about recognizing that we all struggle. It's about meeting people where they are with empathy and understanding.
Exactly. It's a relationship between equals, not a helper, and someone who needs help. It requires you to acknowledge your own darkness, your own struggles, so you can be present with the struggles of others without judgment.
So powerful. Okay, let's talk about boundaries and accountability. This is a tricky one because it can feel like setting boundaries goes against being compassionate.
Right, but the author makes it clear that boundaries and accountability, they're not just compatible with compassion, they're essential for it.
Like that story about the project protocol, where the leader couldn't articulate the consequences if expectations weren't met. It shows how avoiding those tough conversations can actually lead to more problems down the line.
Because when you don't set boundaries, you end up feeling used, resentful, and then it can escalate into attacking someone's character, which is much worse than just addressing the behavior directly.
It's about separating the person from their actions. You can address what they do without attacking who they are, and learning to navigate that space where you're both compassionate and firm. That's so important for healthy relationships.
Now, another barrier to connection that the author talks about is this myth of self-sufficiency. This idea that you have to do everything on your own, that needing help is weak.
Yeah, that I can handle it all mentality. But the author makes this amazing point that until you can receive with an open heart, you can't truly give with an open heart either.
It's like, if you judge yourself for needing help, you're going to judge others for needing help too. It blocks that flow of genuine connection.
I loved that story she told about always being the helper in her family, but never being comfortable asking for support. And when she finally allowed herself to be vulnerable, the whole family dynamic shifted for the better.
And then, in today's world, we have technology as another potential barrier. You can be constantly communicating online, but still feel totally disconnected.
Like that picture she paints of families at a restaurant, everyone on their phones. We're confusing communication with connection. Okay, let's move on to something that might seem simple, but is actually really profound. Self-love and self-acceptance.
It can feel almost selfish to think about loving yourself, but the author says it's not optional, it's essential. It's about trusting yourself, respecting yourself, being kind to yourself.
And when you really think about it, we're often so much harder on ourselves than we would ever be on a friend. That negative self-talk, it's brutal.
Those little comments like, I'm so stupid, they add up. You wouldn't say those things to someone you loved, so why say them to yourself?
And there's that debate, right? Can you love others more than yourself? The author, she really grappled with that, but she ultimately realized that self-love, it's not selfish, it's essential for loving others well.
Because when you love and accept yourself, you have so much more to give. All right, let's talk about vulnerability and authenticity. Two things that can be scary, but also incredibly liberating.
That fear of being truly seen, it's real. It takes courage to show up authentically, especially when you're afraid of being judged.
And the author says that choosing to be authentic is both hopeful and exhausting. Hopeful because it opens the door for real connection, but exhausting because it requires you to keep showing up, even when you'd rather hide.
And it's not about not caring what anyone thinks. It's about being brave enough to be yourself, knowing that you might get hurt. It's about telling your story.
Now, let's talk about perfectionism versus healthy striving. These two often get confused, but they're totally different.
Perfectionism, it's like this trap, this belief that if you do everything perfectly, you'll be safe from shame and judgment. But it's impossible, and it leads to so much anxiety and self-criticism.
It's addictive too, because when you inevitably fall short, you think it's because you weren't perfect enough and you just keep trying harder, never feeling good enough.
And it can really paralyze you. You miss out on opportunities because you're afraid of not being perfect.
Whereas healthy striving, it's about growth, it's about learning, it's about getting better. Perfectionism is about what others think. Healthy striving is about what you think.
So important to understand that difference. Now, how about we talk about self-compassion? It's like the antidote to perfectionism.
Yeah, and Dr. Kristen Neff, she's done so much research on this. She says self-compassion has three elements: self-kindness, calling humanity, and mindfulness.
Self-kindness, it's about treating yourself like you would treat a friend who's struggling. It's about being gentle and understanding with yourself.
And common humanity, it's remembering that everyone struggles, everyone feels inadequate sometimes. You're not alone in your suffering.
And mindfulness, it's about being present with your difficult emotions without getting swept away by them. It's about acknowledging them without letting them define you.
And what's amazing is that self-compassion, it spreads. When you're kind to yourself, you have more compassion for others, it creates a ripple effect.
Okay, let's move on to resilience. That ability to bounce back from challenges.
Studies have shown that resilient people tend to be resourceful, they have good problem-solving skills, they're willing to ask for help, and they believe they can handle their emotions.
But there was one finding in the research that surprised the author. It was about spirituality.
Yeah, a lot of resilient people had a strong sense of spirituality. Not necessarily religion, but a belief in something bigger than themselves, a connection to something greater.
And this sense of spirituality, it seemed to connect to two other important elements, hope and gratitude.
Exactly. Hope, it's not just wishful thinking. It's about believing in the possibility of a better future, having a sense of agency, knowing you can make a difference.
And she differentiates between healthy hope and, like, a sense of entitlement.
Yeah, that feeling of, I deserve this. That's not real hope. Real hope comes from a place of, I can do this. I can work towards this.
And that sense of agency, that belief in your ability to affect change, that's crucial. All right, let's talk about letting go of numbing and powerlessness.
Numbing, it's what we do when we're overwhelmed by vulnerability. We overeat, we overwork, we stay busy, all to avoid those difficult emotions.
And the author, she makes a really important distinction between shame and guilt.
Yeah, shame is that feeling of I am bad, whereas guilt is I did something bad. Shame attacks your core self-worth. Guilt is about a specific action.
So becoming aware of your shame triggers and learning to respond with intention, that's key for building shame resilience.
It's about recognizing shame, understanding where it comes from, reaching out for support, talking about it, and ultimately believing in your worthiness.
Okay, how about we talk about gratitude and joy? These are powerful forces in wholehearted living.
Gratitude, it's not a passive feeling, it's a practice. You have to actively cultivate it, whether through journaling, meditation, or simply expressing thanks.
And joy, how is that different from happiness?
The author describes joy as deeper, more lasting. Happiness is more external. Joy is an inner light. Like happiness is an atmosphere. Joy is a state of being.
We need both though, right? But what gets in the way of us experiencing them?
Two big things. Scarcity and the fear of the dark. Scarcity makes us think we have to hold back on joy and gratitude, like it's a limited resource.
And the fear of the dark, that's our fear of vulnerability. We're afraid to let ourselves feel fully because what if it gets taken away?
But the truth is, joy and gratitude, they sustain us during hard times. Okay, let's talk about two more concepts, intuition and faith. These can feel a little less concrete, but they're important nonetheless.
Intuition, it's that gut feeling, that inner knowing. It's about learning to trust that voice.
And faith, it's not just about religion. It's about believing in what you can't see, being okay with uncertainty. It's about letting go of the need to control everything.
Okay, let's talk about creativity. This might seem unrelated, but the author found it to be a key element in wholehearted living.
She realized that creativity isn't some special talent, it's part of who we all are. It's our unique contribution to the world.
And she had three big insights about creativity. First, that it's essential to who we are. Second, that it's our unique gift. And third, that it's necessary for making meaning.
In creativity, it doesn't have to be some big artistic endeavor. It can be cooking, gardening, anything that involves making or connecting.
So how does creativity help us on this wholehearted journey?
It helps us let go of comparison because our creativity is unique to us. And it helps us appreciate our own contributions no matter how small.
All right, two more things to cover. Play and rest. These might seem obvious, but they're often overlooked.
The author, she was initially skeptical about play, but she found that it's crucial for everyone, not just kids. Dr. Stuart Brown's research shows that play impacts brain development, empathy, social skills, even creativity.
And he says the opposite of play isn't work, it's depression. Play brings joy, excitement, it helps us deal with challenges.
And rest. It's just as important. Our culture glorifies exhaustion, but we need rest to function properly. Sleep deprivation has all sorts of negative consequences.
So play and rest, they're not luxuries, they're necessities. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about meaningful work.
A lot of people describe meaningful work as a calling. It gives you a sense of purpose, a feeling that you're contributing to something bigger than yourself.
And it's connected to your gifts and talents, your spirituality, your commitment.
Meaningful work, it's not always your main source of income, but it's something you're passionate about. It might take time to find or create, but it's worth it.
Okay, final topic. Laughter, song, and dance. These might seem like, just fun activities, but there's so much more than that.
They are ways of connecting, expressing ourselves, celebrating, even mourning. Barbara Ehrenreich talks about collective ecstasy, that feeling of joy we experience when we share these things with others.
So how do laughter, song, and dance connect to wholehearted living?
They remind us that we're not alone. Laughter helps us build shame, resilience, song and dance let us express our hearts. They're all about connection.
But they can also be vulnerable, right?
Definitely. There's that fear of looking silly, of not being good enough.
Hmm.
But we have to let go of those fears and allow ourselves to express ourselves authentically.
Like that quote from Almost Famous, the only true currency in this bankrupt world is what you share with someone else when you're uncool. So true. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what are your final thoughts? What stood out to you the most from this book?
For me, it's that reminder that wholehearted living, it's not about achieving some perfect state. It's about embracing the messiness, the imperfections, and having the courage to show up as you are. It's about those small, everyday acts of bravery, compassion, and connection.
I love that. And for you listening, we hope this deep dive has sparked some new insights for you. Maybe there's one of these gifts of imperfection that really resonates with you right now, or maybe you're inspired to try one of those practical tips we discussed. Whatever it is, we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas and see how they can help you live a more wholehearted life. Thanks for joining us on this journey.